Before you get into medical coding, there are some things that you need to know. Let's talk about it. Hey there, I'm Victoria. I'm a medical coder, auditor, educator, and content creator, and on my channel, I provide tips, tricks, and tutorials to help you be successful in a medical coding career. Now, all career paths have their surprises. There are things that they just don't teach you in school that you learn on the field, and medical coding's no exception. But what are the things that you should probably know before you get into medical coding, and what are some of the surprises that you may find out once you start actively working? If you need more information on medical coding and you haven't already subscribed, I would highly encourage you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can get alerts when I post new episodes. One of the first things you should understand about medical coding is it's not like other types of coding. In fact, it's not a programming type of language at all, like Python or JavaScript. It's actually the review of medical records, abstracting certain data elements, and then transferring those data elements into code sets. It does have a little bit of math in it, but really not much. There are certain codes where you might have to calculate things like square centimeters. So you have to know that if a provider documents that a wound was 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters and he put a 3 by 3 skin graft on it, that you take the 3 times 3 and that equals 9 square centimeters. Or you might have to add things like if a patient has multiple lacerations or burns or something, there might be a little bit of addition or calculation of square centimeters, and that's pretty much all the math in medical coding. Depending on what type of coding you're doing, you might not even do any math at all. There's different types of coding actually, kind of like engineering. You have software engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. Coding's the same way. We kind of are all coders, but we do different kind of stuff. There's coders that code just for services provided by doctors and advanced practitioners. There's coders that code for hospital services, so the whole inpatient stay, everything that kind of got covered in the hospital. There's coders that just do diagnosis coding. And depending on the type of coding and the specialties involved, you can actually receive different types of pay. I made a whole video about this if you want to check it out, right up there on the card. When it comes to education for medical coding, you actually don't need a bachelor's degree, you don't need an associate's degree. Anyone can start learning medical coding. There's lots of online courses that you can take. For example, the AAPC, AHIMA, there's independent instructors. Really, you just need to take some online courses and pass a certification exam. Most employers only want to hire medical coders that are certified. Now, if you're starting out with no medical background, you might want to go through a community college or technical school to get some sort of diploma type program, because if you don't understand medical terminology, anatomy and physiology, and even medical insurance, those can be some hard things to learn on your own. You might need a little bit more support than you can get from just an on-demand type of option. I mean, it really depends on what kind of learner you are, though. But yeah, the big focus is really getting a certification. Like the AAPC has their CPC certification. That's probably the most popular one to look into. AHIMA has the CCA, which is the Certified Coding Associate, and that's their entry-level coding certification. I certainly wouldn't discourage anyone who wants to go out and get their bachelor's degree, but it's really not required for most medical coding jobs. Bachelor's degree are more so if you want to become a supervisor or manager in coding or revenue cycle. Most medical coders are also routinely audited by someone in their organization to make sure that they have a high level of accuracy. Most coders are held to a 95 to 98% accuracy in their code submissions. It's also productivity based, meaning there's going to be a quota of how many codes or charts you have to submit within an hour or a day. As far as what the number is of how many codes or charts you have to submit, that really is dependent on your organization. There are some benchmarks, I'll include the link below, but it can depend on so many different factors. What type of coding you're doing, how long are the charts, what's the specialty, and even things like how efficient the processes are. Because if you're having to do things like pull paper records or charts, that's going to take you certainly a lot longer than if everything's on the EMR and you're just clicking a button on a work queue and it pops everything up. Here's the patient's chart, here's where you put the codes in. That's a lot faster than something where there's more manual interventions. One of the common concerns with new medical coders is they struggle with their job search. Remember how I said medical coding, you don't need a degree or a diploma, you really just need to pass that certification exam? Well, some people are really good test takers, so employers are a little bit cautious with new coders because they want to make sure that when they actually give them live charts, they know what they're doing versus knowing how to just pass that certification exam, because the regulations on how to become a medical coder aren't that stringent. Job search strategy is a must for medical coders. You have to make sure that your resume is completely polished, you know where to find jobs, and you know how to network, because that's going to give you your best chances at landing a great medical coding job. There's also some annual costs associated with being a medical coder that take some people by surprise. So the medical coding books that are utilized, like CPT here, these books, this is the 2021 edition. It changes every single year, and every year there are hundreds of code updates between the various code sets. Now, when you're employed, your employer will probably buy you books or a reasonable search tool that you can use, which we'll talk about. But aside from that, you also have to pay membership dues. With the AAPC, for example, if you don't pay your annual membership, you will lose your credentials. It's books, membership fees. Continuing education is huge in medical coding. We have to submit a certain amount of continuing education units every single year. There are some resources where you can find them for free or cheap, but a lot of the ones that you want that are specialty specific, you may have to pay for. If you're interested in some of the costs associated with medical coding, like how you have to pay for examination fees, for example, you can check out this video here. It is on the costs of being a medical coder. Now, your code books are not the only thing that changes. In fact, change is pretty much constant in medical coding. There's federal regulations that change constantly, and there's insurance guidelines that change constantly. There's updates to the Federal Register, to policies, to insurance coverages. There were a lot of changes that happened when the pandemic hit, and suddenly telemedicine became very popular. There were new vaccine codes that had to be implemented. So there was quite a whirlwind in the medical coding industry right around that time. So just when you think you have everything down, there will be something that will change. And there's also exceptions to just about every guideline. In fact, there's exceptions to a lot of guidelines, and that's one of the things you find out more so when you get onto the field. Medical coding is a lot different from what they teach you in school versus what you actually have to do in practice. In school, they give you these perfect little examples where everything is documented as it should be to match up with the codes, and that's not always how it works in the field. There's a lot of providers that have just different terms that they use that don't quite match up with the right code, or they leave out components and you have to send them a request to clarify their records or addend their records. There might be software or programs or guidelines that you have to follow that just don't match up with what you were taught in medical coding school. So no school can cover everything, and there may be some things that maybe they mentioned once or twice that you'll realize are more prevalent once you get working in medical coding. Things like CPT Assist or Coding Clinic, which I have a video on, or the Federal Register, where they have proposed and then implemented federal guidelines, which include things like coding changes that are being made. When you sit for any medical coding certification exam, you have to utilize your paper books, but a lot of medical coders use what are called Encoder programs, and those can vary between things that are just a search tool to look up codes versus some that actually kind of guide you or help you find the appropriate code. For example, if you were looking for a code for an excision of the gallbladder, you could type in excision and it would say, what are you excising? And you would type in gallbladder and it would go, okay, well, did you do it open? Did you do it laparoscopic? And it would help point you to the right code. You could look at the description of the code and then go, okay, yeah, this is what I want, or wow, this is way off. And after reviewing it, you might realize there's additional codes that you need to use, or that there was something that was done that maybe doesn't quite fit that code description and you need to use what's called an unlisted code. With medical coding, specificity is king. We want to know down to the minute details of what was happening. Was it right or left? Was it incarcerated? Was it strangulated? Was it sore, red, painful, irritated? You know, all those little details that can go into things, because we want to dive as deep as we can to make sure that we're abstracting the right code and submitting the data as accurately as possible. One other thing I do want to mention is that there is outsourcing and offshoring in medical coding. So there may be healthcare organizations that don't directly hire coders. They outsource it to maybe a billing and coding organization that they say, hey, you know, here's all our stuff. You just do the billing and coding over on your end. So that doesn't always necessarily eliminate jobs, it just kind of shifts them. Sometimes when these healthcare organizations want to cut costs, for example, when we had the last recession, they look at their administrative staff because they know their clinical staff they absolutely have to have. And one of the things they will sometimes look at and then want to outsource is their medical coding. So there are coders who have worked in healthcare organizations before who have made that decision to outsource, and they have lost that position. But the position itself still just kind of exists, just at a different location. So that's outsourcing, and then offshoring is when it goes from domestic to another country to benefit from the lower labor costs. So if you're looking to get into medical coding and you want to work locally, check your local organizations and make sure that they're not outsourcing to somewhere else. But maybe you're in the area where that outsourced medical billing and coding company is. So those are the things you really should know before getting into medical coding. I have one bonus tip for you though. Once you get one medical coding certification, they can be like tattoos where you want to get more. There's a lot of coders now that are very interested in obtaining multiple credentials, but understand that multiple credentials means multiple courses that you have to pay for and multiple exams that you have to pay for. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hook me up with a big thumbs up. I will see you in the next video, and until then, just keep on coding on.